Good morning. It's December 8th today, and we are in Hosea chapter 11. And this is an important passage to me personally. There was a time when I was in seminary many years ago and was studying hermeneutics and was studying the use of the Old Testament and the New Testament and trying to come to an understanding of how the apostles and writers of our New Testament use the writers of our New Testament use the Old Testament in quotation in their works. And it was important to me that they, were careful with the text that they were using and struggling a little bit with faith and trying to understand what it means to believe, even if you don't understand something. And so I came across this particular quotation in Matthew chapter 2, beginning in verse 13. It says, "Now when they had departed," okay, this is after they depart from, the wise men depart from Herod's presence. "Behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, 'Rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him.' And he rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, 'Out of Egypt I called my son.'" Now, when Matthew quotes that, he doesn't tell us which prophet says this, but the only prophet who says this word is actually Hosea. And so I, went back to look at the original source to see, okay, what did Hosea mean when he gave this prophecy? Certainly we know of Hosea as a prophet, but is everything that Hosea says prophecy? It doesn't seem like it when you get to Hosea chapter 11 and you read it this way. It says, "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. But the more they were called, the more they went away from me. They sacrificed to the Baals, and they burned incense to images. It was I who taught them. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by the arms. But they did not realize it was I who healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with ties of love. To them I was like one who lifts a little child to the cheek, and I bent down to feed him." So what Hosea is actually talking about, what God's saying through Hosea here, is he's recounting Israel's history, and he's talking about the time when they were brought out of Egypt from slavery and brought into the Promised Land. And he says that after that process, they went their own separate ways. They continued in their idolatry, and even though God was bringing them up as a child and loving them as a child, who he found basically on the side of the road, they had no regard for him, and they ignored him, and they walked their own separate way. And so as I read this in Hosea, I wondered, well, how can this be a prophecy of Christ? What is going on here? And it took me a little while, quite a bit of struggling with this to try to come to an understanding. Did Matthew misunderstand what Hosea says? Is he just pulling things out of thin air and saying this must be a prophecy because it somehow relates to something that's going on in Jesus' life? But the more that I kind of meditated on it and understood how this functions in the role of Hosea's book and how Matthew is using it in his book, I came to understand that really what Hosea is talking about, and there's a lot of depth of what he's talking about, but really what he's talking about is that God has repeatedly through history continued to pursue his people, and that he is bringing about return from exile in so many different ways. In the Exodus, and then later on in the exile itself, when they come back from exile and back into the Promised Land. But then in the time of Jesus, something even greater is happening. Not just an exile from a physical place, but a return from exile in a spiritual place. So from death to life. And so Jesus is another one of the iterations in this process that God uses. And Matthew is going to show how there's going to be many who reject, many who wander away, but Jesus is going to be resolute in his pursuing of them, just as God always has been in history. So this allusion to something that happened in Israel's past helps us to see how God is doing even greater things in Matthew's eyes with the coming of Messiah.